Viewers, what a big day it's been. And I'll keep it simple tonight. The Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, is going to face the electorate, as you all know, in about 15 months or so. He's hoping to return to power for the third time at the head of a majority government. No politician, especially as adept at him, would want to pass up the opportunity to play a little to the galleries by promising some sops, some freebies, to get the voters on his side, to curry favor just a little bit. But the Prime Minister has resisted the temptation, and that says a lot. The budget presented by the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, has been described using many terms, but no serious commentator has called it an election budget. Viewers, in fact, many would agree that it is a balanced budget. It prudently maintains a fiscal deficit target at 5.9%, which is the need of the hour, while delivering a rupees 10 lakh crore CapEx, that is capital expenditure. Viewers, a 30-odd% jump, and at the same time also rationalizing personal income tax. While it is true that every government has been interrogated when the fiscal deficit has edged up to 4%, let's not forget that we need to give this government some elbow room. Why? Because we are emerging from a once-a-century black swan event. Viewers, it isn't just the COVID-19 pandemic, but also a war that broke out almost a year ago, that required the government to announce stimulus to prop up the economy. In fact, it had to continue some of the measures. Today, as we emerge as the strongest big economy in the world, the need of the hour is to ensure growth in the face of persisting and unprecedented, unpredictable global headwinds. The war isn't over. The shadow of corona still lurks, not in just our imagination and our psyche, but, viewers, on the tapestry of the world. We don't know in what form a variant might strike again. But, viewers, despite all of this, the FM has gone out there and, as I said, given us a budget that gives primacy to prudency. Now, we will break down this year's budget and tell you how it hopes to give the economy the incentive needed to boost growth, spur consumption, and ensure our spending power is increased while it trims out subsidies which for long have burdened our public coffers. Let's go over some of these points, viewers, and they're appearing on your screens. No tax for those earning 7 lakh annually. That's an important step that has been taken. Railway budget is up by 1 lakh crores. It's doubled, viewers. Infra spending up by 3 lakh crores. This is a very big number, as I told you. Freebies have been rationalized. No tax on MSME with turnover less than 3 crores. Again, a very important step. Box full of initiatives for tribals, those who usually get left behind, viewers. The PM Awas Yojana allocation up by 66%. 50 more airports. Now, viewers, this is a very interesting development here. 50 more airports, even though there is no guarantee that Prime Minister Modi is going to return. So he's betting on the long term. Politicians don't usually bet on the long term. There is usually no reward for thinking long term. Ayushman Bharat budget up by 10%. This is an 800 crore hike. So, viewers, he's thinking of health. Very few politicians have won an election thinking about health. Swachh Bharat budget has been more than doubled. Now, the budget has been hailed by government ministers and managers as pro-growth and forward-looking, which aligns with Modi's mission of 2047. It's the foundation, as they say, for Amrit Kaal. The capital outlay for 23-24 has been raised by up to 10 lakh crores, which will take GDP ratio to 3.3% at a 20-year high. The 33% boost to capital expenditure and higher allocation for infrastructure will boost the economy and create more jobs. That's the hope, which will increase the purchasing power of people, leading to an increase in consumption and ensuring a domestic-centric economy. The budget also emphasizes on boosting savings by putting more money in your pocket or leaving more money in your pocket. For the first time, Finance Ministry has announced a new scheme for women called Mahila Samman Saving Certificate, time-bound, one-time small savings scheme. Will offer interest rates of 7.5% for a maximum deposit of rupees 2 lakhs. The deposit amount in senior citizen savings scheme has also been increased from rupees 15 lakhs to 30 lakhs. Income tax slab change is a huge tax relief for salaried middle class and will leave more money in the hands of the middle class. That's what government is telling you, viewers, but obviously there are many who are saying that the number of beneficiaries may not be much because this applies to the new tax regime. A large number of us are still with the old tax regime. The government says that this is not an attempt to force people from changing from one regime to the other, but certainly it creates the incentives to do so, to modernize our tax structure, our filing structure, and of course compliance, viewers. Let's very quickly now, after having set the base, let me tell you, viewers, that while Nirmala Sitharaman laid down the blueprint for what she called was a Samrid Bharat, the description that was also used by the Prime Minister himself, the opposition wasn't impressed. But before I get to the opposition, let's play out some of what the Finance Minister said, and then of course what the Prime Minister has also said. And we will bring that to you. But viewers, the thrust is clear. They're betting on the long term, the two of them. Is that really, therefore, the message to the opposition that, look, let us not be tied down with the short term? Amrit Kaal is not a sob story. It's not a one long freebie. It's not ravery. It is not incentivizing ravery. Is this really game changing? Let's open this up. Let's open this up, viewers. Let me ask some straight off the bat questions. And I want to first start with those who are today not satisfied. We spoke to you earlier today, Dr. Mehrotra. We spoke to also Sanjay Jha, who represents the Congress point of view, and others like people from the left. MB Rajesh, of course, joining us, Minister for Local Self-Government and Excise, and Dr. Shashi Panja, Minister in charge, Department of Women and Child Development with the Government of Bengal. So let me first start from the economic perspective. Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, after having gone through perhaps the fine print of this budget, what do you make of it? Do you agree that there is a message here, and that message is that Amrit Kaal isn't going to be a sob story? This is going to be about boosting savings, trimming subsidies, building growth and creating demand.
So the good news is that capital expenditure is going to increase, and a very significant part of that is going to state governments, and that amount, which last year was 1 trillion rupees or 1 lakh crores, it's gone up to 1.3 trillion rupees this year, and that is very good, and it is to be spent on capital expenditure. And this is important because state governments actually spend on capital projects which generate jobs, much more jobs than when the central government spends. So that's the good news. But for those of us who might have been thinking that this is going to be a the election-oriented budget, well, clearly there are very significant elements in it which are election-oriented. One of that is that the Jal Jeevan Mission has received a very significant increase in allocations. And at the same time, when Jal Jeevan Mission has been increased in allocations, and we also got some personal income tax swaps, and at the same time tax swaps to the absolutely richest who earn more than a certain income which is very, very high, and they've gotten away with a rate which has come down from 43% to 39%. The other point I think that we need to keep in mind is that MNREGA, where demand for work has not fallen off at all, and where workers have not been over the course of this year been paid even their wages, has seen a decline from an allocation last year of 89,000 crores to 60,000 crores. How the government justifies this really beats me, especially since 53 million workers have been added to agriculture, went back to rural areas on account of reverse migration which took place in 2020.
Right.
And that continued in 2021. PLFS data shows in unmistakable terms that there was an addition of a 25% in the agricultural workforce. So obviously there is no work for them, almost no work for them there, and MNREGA allocations have been cut at the same time.
Okay,
Back
this is
to you,
interesting
Rahul.
because I didn't know that investing in Jal Jeevan Mission, which is obviously an attempt to bring tapped water to every house,
is a problem. I'm sorry. Yes, there are trade-offs even
but
in
good
social
water
welfare,
ensures good health.
because health and education are public goods.
Okay, so are we
Well,
divorcing?
Very nice, but you know what the government has done? It has pretended.
Okay, I
it
feel
has
that
increased
tonight.
allocation on health when it has not, but it's actually.
Okay, I just feel that tonight. Tonight the critics are clutching at straws. There hasn't much there, but let's hair split a little bit. Let's get the other side. I just get this feeling, I might be completely wrong, and I don't want to pass judgment. I want to listen to all the experts tonight. I want to bring in Dr. K.V. Subramanian, who joins us from Washington, D.C. There's also Dr. Anand Parangrea, who joins us from, the US. I want to bring these gentlemen into this because they know the numbers like the back of their hands. Dr. K.V. Subramanian, we are hearing this constant refrain about MNREGA and callousness. It's in the same breath. Cutting MNREGA means callousness. The opposition, led by P. Chidambaram, has said that the finance minister didn't even mention the word poverty in her budget or unemployment. She only referred, thankfully, to the poor. Just twice, the word poor, just twice. How do you respond to this criticism?
So Rahul, I think you hit the nail on its head by saying that some of the criticism is really, clutching at straws. Let me again correct data here. I just looked at the budget at a glance estimates. The budget estimates for MNREGA, for the year that has gone by was 68,000 crores. The actual estimate, revised estimates is 60,000 crores. And the, budget estimate for the coming year has been kept exactly at 60,000 crores. The fact that out of 68,000 crores that was budgeted, only 60,000 crores actually got utilized is essentially, evidence of the fact that MNREGA is distress work. This has been Dr. Mehrotra and others would actually recall there was a chapter in the 2018-19 economic survey where we showed very clear empirical evidence that, MNREGA work is demanded far more when there is distress. And clearly, if you look at, MNREGA work has actually halved compared to, last year compared to the previous year. And that is indicative of the fact that the employment situation has improved significantly. And that, again, the PLFS data shows. So I don't agree with this because the numbers that are being quoted are clearly incorrect. There is the reason MNREGA allocation has declined is because the demand for distress work has gone down because of the employment situation improving. As for the other, I think it is very important to understand, and already data shows that the emphasis on public capital expenditure, because it really fosters construction sector activities and thereby creates jobs for the urban poor, I think the evidence is clear. If you look at, again, the PLFS data, compare 2020-21 versus 2018-19, that this emphasis on public capex has indeed created jobs. It is also actually the reason why India is a positive outlier, because it enhances supply, thereby actually providing our 7% growth with inflation at 70% in a global economy which is actually struggling with both these problems, these twin problems. So I think, having seen the proof of the pudding, the budget actually just doubles down on what has worked very well.
Okay, so let me just quickly bring in MB Rajesh, Dr. Arvind Panagria, as well as Jayant Sinha, to also get the government's perspective. Now, MB Rajesh, I was speaking to Piyush Goyal just before this show, and he said that the MNREGA spend is tied to demand for work, it's distress work. The offtake suggests that the distress is less, so let's not be selective about the numbers. How do you respond to this?
See, right now I was hearing to a gentleman regarding the drastic reduction in allocation for MNREGA. He was saying that only 60,000 of budgeted 68,000 crores were able to spend for MNREGA in the current financial year, and this is because of improved employment situation and lack of demand. That is wrong, absolutely wrong. I am the minister in charge of MNREGA, rural development and local self-government in Kerala. I can tell you our experience in Kerala. In the current year, we had demanded 10 crore labor days from the center for MNREGA. But the central government had allotted only 6 crore man days, which we met. That target was met by November 2022. And then we again wanted an enhancement in labor days. But the central government was not ready to give 10 crore labor days as required by us. Subsequently, after our repeated demands, repeated pressure, the central government increased that labor days only to 8.5 crore. So this is the situation. And despite that, bringing in norms, controls and various other interventions to weaken the implementation of MNREGA, this has resulted in lack of utilization of allocation for MNREGA. So this is the fact, this is the reality. So this is a culmination. The drastic reduction in the funds for MGNREGA is a culmination of systematic efforts made by Modi government ever since it came to power to undermine MNREGA. So now this is a death bell for MNREGA.
Okay. Undermine and sound the death knell for MNREGA. Mr. Sinha wants to respond, political response to a political charge, and I want to bring in Dr. Arvind Panagria right after to get the numbers. Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Sinha.
Rahul, I must say that your guests have their numbers completely wrong. And as a result of that, the statements that they're making also, unfortunately, are wrong. Let's get to the actual numbers. The numbers that Professor Subramaniam quoted, his numbers are usually right, but in this case, he misread the Kisan Samman Nidhi for the NREGA numbers. The actual NREGA numbers are 2021-22 actuals, 98,468. The budget estimates for this financial year that's going on right now was 73,000 crores. But unlike what Sri Rajesh ji is saying, the actual expenditure, the revised estimates for this year are actually 89,400 crores. For the next year, it's budgeted at 60,000 crores. Why is this? Why are these numbers? The fact is that NREGA is a demand-driven program. The government by law is supposed to pay out whatever is demanded. So if Mr. Rajesh in Kerala is demanding so many man days or person days rather, they will be supplied by the government because by law these payments have to be made. Right now, the provisional number that's been put in is 60,000 crores because the estimate is as the economy has picked up, there will be less demand for it. However, if there is more demand for it, then in the supplementary demand for grants, more capital will be allocated for NREGA and ample funds will be available. So everybody who wants to work in the rural area will be able to work. And coming back to this point about, cutting NREGA money, that's absolutely wrong, because we had put in 73,000 crores for this fiscal year that's ongoing. We actually ended up spending 89,400 crores. So NREGA is very important for us. We have used it very wisely and very well during the COVID pandemic when there were significant migrations. I, as a Lok Sabha MP in my own constituency, in 2 districts, Hazaribagh and Ramgarh, have monitored the implementation of NREGA and made sure that this was saturated with migrant workers and they got the work that was their privilege. And we have ensured that this has worked, which is why the numbers went up and now their numbers are going down. So I'd ask everyone to actually study the numbers carefully and closely before they make these outrageous claims.
Okay. Dr. Pranagriya, what are the real numbers here? We've had the government via its MP say one lot of statistics. We've had Mr. Rajesh say something else. What's the story here?
Well, it seems to me Mr. Sinha has the right numbers, and I completely agree with him that it is a demand-driven program, and the government has in the past made good on that promise. It's required under the law, so there is no issue of making good on the promise. It is the law. So that's, I think, where I stand on this. But related, let me just say that partly the government's budget also is working on the expectation that the migrant workers will return. You see, you don't want to turn that return of the migrants to the rural area as a permanent feature. You want the migrants to come back. Ultimately, the big action in the economy is in the urban areas where the better jobs are. And India at this stage does need migration out of agriculture into industry and services. And so you don't want to put that kind of migration into jeopardy by, flushing the NREGA program from the beginning with a lot of money. But if there is demand, then the allocation will be increased, as has been done in the past.
Okay, so this is very interesting. Sanjay Jha and Dr. Shashi Panja, this is relief. It's not an entitlement. It's not dole. Let's move to the next chapter in our evolution as an economy. And it actually tells you that things are changing on the ground. Sanjay Jha, it's demand-based. And it should be.
Yeah, Rahul, there are 2 points here. We know that it is as per law, but we also recognize that the big hurdle in India has always been execution. I'm not going to get into the numbers debate because you're hearing a lot of contesting figures. But let me go with Jayant's numbers.
Maybe because these numbers are watertight. Are you now skirting? Because your boss, your party boss has come out and made some statements along these lines, challenging all the numbers. And you've seen it.
So I'm saying I will go with Jayant's numbers, but I'm going to pose a question to him. I'm going to pose a question to him because this will need a resolution before the debate is over. Yeah, just a minute. That the number of households that were covered by MNREGA in 2021-22 were 73 million. Are we saying, and that number, by the way, in the following year, which is concluding in this financial year, is down already to 57 million. So you're saying that 16 million households are being covered less under MNREGA. It is hard to fathom that in a post, well, just a minute. In a post-pandemic world where we saw reverse migration, it appears to me rather irrational prima facie that the people who went back to their villages did not demand anything at all. And let us not also deny this other reality, Rahul, that state governments have not been paid the due that they were expecting for the wages to be paid for MNREGA. That by itself is an artificial suppression of demand. Now let me come to the second point. You mentioned very interestingly at the beginning that Mr. Modi has taken a dispassionate view of the long-term vision of India. Now everyone on this panel is a seasoned veteran, and I will tell you, it's hardly an argumentative issue that you need to invest in education and health. Let's look at this budget. What is the percentage of expenditure as a percentage of GDP? We can't go into the absolutes of health. Not even 2%, is below 2%. On an education, it is hovering around 3.1%. Is this really the sustainable story for Indian growth? I can tell you the answer is no. Third point, on agriculture, I want to ask Jayant, because he was part of the government, when they made this very fanciful announcement of doubling farmer income by 2022. You know, how can you take their numbers with any credibility? I mean, end of day, if you look at this budget, it tries to please all and actually has got both its feet on a banana peel. It falls flat on its face. And a simple example, does Jayant Sinha and the other people really believe that government CapEx is going to really drive India's growth? I mean, you believed it's going to crowd in private investment. It hasn't happened. Despite several SOPs given to the corporate sector in terms of a 1,45,000 crore tax bonanza in 2019 and a production-linked scheme that hasn't been able to create jobs.
Okay.
So ultimately,
why are private players shying away, you're saying? To just boil it down, MNREGA allocations, the cutting down of that reeks of a callousness and perhaps even an arrogance. And of course, there is widespread confusion with regards to numbers, you're saying. Okay, Mr. Sinha, you've got to respond to this and set the record straight. We also are joined by Sanjeev Sanyal, member of the PMEAC. So we have more people giving you numbers, credible numbers. Let's go straight back to Mr. Sinha.
So Sanjay ji mentioned many points. I can't address each one of them because he just rattled them off. So let me just pick on a couple which I think are the most important. Number one, Sanjay ji said that spending on capital expenditure, government CapEx is not going to drive growth, and he's absolutely wrong. The fact is that, as Professor Subramaniam was saying earlier, this is an economic strategy that's working. While the rest of the world is slowing down, India's growth remains very robust. In fact, we are the shining star in the global economy. And that is because the government has pursued a very prudent and pragmatic economic strategy of emphasizing capital expenditure, fiscal consolidation, and ensuring that there is support for vulnerable groups as required. That has been a consistent strategy that has been followed. Sanjeev Sanyal ji has just joined us. He will also tell you about this because he has been part of shaping all of this when he was in the Ministry of Finance and now in his current role. But there has been a consistent strategy that has been followed, and this strategy has borne dividends because of the push for high multiplier investments. And in fact, if you even look at private sector capex is also going up because, of course, capacity utilization has gone up, because the banks have worked down their NPAs, and credit growth, in fact, is very strong. It's over 22%, 33% from other sources as well. So when we look at all of these parameters, we find that this is an economic strategy that does need to continue, and in fact is continuing right now. So that's one very important point, that private sector and public sector capex is driving growth and is going to continue to drive growth. The second point that Sanjay ji was making is that we have not invested enough on education and health, but he's not right here either, because the fact of the matter is that education and health are state subjects, and the better governed states, and these are the majority of states in India, these better governed states are spending a lot on education and health as well. So if you look at it from the point of view of a household, from just the Aam Admi's perspective, that person is getting benefits from the central government, which have been steadily increased over a period of time. And as far as the states are concerned, which have a lot more discretion and a lot more ability to invest in health and education, they have made very many significant strides as far as health and education is concerned as well. So therefore what we need to do is we need to really understand health and education when we combine the role of the state and the center. So these are two important points that I am countering and responding back what Sanjay ji was saying.
Okay, Dr. Panja, there has also been a significant allocation to the states from the CapEx kitty, and that is in the spirit of enhancing cooperative federalism. Would you agree? Is she there with us, Dr. Panja? Okay, we just lost her there. I want to go back to you, Mr. Mehrotra, on that point. As you have made that point, do you believe that this is in the spirit and in the interest of furthering cooperative federalism? Because that's what we're all about. Here, the Prime Minister has been saying that, look, at the end of the day, We have been building bridges with the opposition, and that's what we're doing right now through this budget. How do you respond to that, Dr. Mehrotra?
Well, I mean, I think the less said about cooperative federalism, the better. I don't want to get into that political slinging match. I think the bottom line is, it's no one's case that public investment will not drive growth. I don't think Sanjay Jha meant that either. But the real point that I think has to be driven home is that private investment is not being crowded in. The capacity utilization, although it has risen from its pandemic low level of 60%, has certainly risen to 73–74%. And although there is some uptick in private investment, the fact of the matter is that the high profits that corporates have made in recent years have been used to deleverage and reduce their debt rather than put in private investment. No one denies that. So the tragedy is that capacity utilization is still running at 73–74%, as RBI is telling us. And until it gets to close to 80%, new private investment will not happen. And new private investment also will not happen unless private final consumption per capita rises. And per capita, it has hardly risen. This is the problem. And why has per capita consumption not risen? Because jobs are not there in the non-farm sector. With all due respect, we've had this conversation over the course of the day, Rahul. Unfortunately, the PLFS is showing that jobs are not growing. I think Mr. Panagaria knows this. Mr. Sanyal knows this. The fact of the matter is that the increase in labor force participation and worker participation that the PLFS is showing, the annual data is what I'm talking about, and the drop in the so-called drop in unemployment that it is showing is on account of unpaid family labor. I've said this 5 times over in the morning, and I'm going to repeat it.
Okay.
Because
unpaid family labor.
You have to understand that unpaid family labor is,
which is boosting the numbers.
That doesn't mean jobs.
Okay, so
ILO does not recognize unpaid family labor.
Why aren't private corporates coming to the CapEx party, Mr. Sanyal? Clearly, there is lack of confidence.
So let me say 2 things. First of all,
that's what he's claiming.
Let me say, first of all, I don't know why people are getting annoyed about the fact that we are spending more on infrastructure. Surely this is a good thing in its own right, irrespective of the impact on crowding in or crowding out. Remember, for all these years we used to hear that Indian infrastructure was bad. Look, we are spending on it. It's a good thing in its own rights, and you can clearly see our airports are improving, our highways are improving, and many of the other things, infrastructure is improving. So this is a good in its own right. Secondly, it creates multipliers also in its own right, irrespective of impact on private sector. So it creates jobs. There's more than adequate evidence that capital spending has much higher multiplier effects than any other kind of spending, and we are increasing that. So first of all, let me get that out of the way. This is a good thing in its own right, irrespective of what happens on the private sector spend. Second, it is not true, as the chief economic advisor yesterday pointed out, that private investment is not rising. One could argue it should rise more, but it is actually clearly accelerating. You can see that in the credit numbers. And by the way, I'm not sure why there's also a fuss about the fact that many of our corporates have deleveraged. It's a good thing, surely, now that they have deleveraged, and there was this whole debate about twin balance sheets, banks have a problem, corporates have a problem. Well, all that has been cleaned up. Surely that is the position you want to be in when you want to go for a capital spending sort of cycle. And the private sector is now in that cycle. The banks are clean. The corporate sector is seeing its the increases in its capacity utilization. And by the way, record amounts of FDI is also flowing in. The impact of supply chains being shifted to India is already beginning to show, but it will accelerate from here on. And I totally do not agree with the fact that jobs are not being created. I mean, it's totally hypocritical to use the PLFS data for annual just because now the quarterly numbers, which are much more frequent, are not going to support a certain story. So therefore you will go and look at, oh, let's look at the annual number. Of course, the annual number is obviously very old now, and therefore is from the COVID period. Now look at the latest numbers. There's no question that unemployment is falling and job creation is growing, and you could see that in all kinds of surrounding data as well, EPFO data, you name it. There's been clear hiring across in all kinds of sectors that we have reopened, like tourism, for example, is seeing booming sales in at every parameter. So I think this is absolutely hypocritical to be using annual data for PLFS just because, that very helpfully is still back in the COVID period. There is also, similarly, a point was made by somebody earlier that, oh my God, there has been a decline in MNREGA. Well, you know what? That's exactly what you should expect to happen when you have growth. In fact, if there's more growth, that number will decline even further. Then you will claim, oh my God, this is such a bad thing. Ridiculous. This is a very good sign that labor markets are tightening. So PLFS data shows that growth is good. MNREGA data declining is a good thing, and of course we are seeing all the balance sheets have been cleaned up. If every economist of any standing around the world has stated that India's economic performance has been a shining hope in a world where the world is seeing recession. I can't believe that we are arguing about this. I'm sure there are many other interesting things we can debate.
Okay. Dr. Panja, what's the problem then? I mean, surely we can't grudge the government for spending on CapEx. I mean, that's the least that you should have a problem with.
I lost out at a very vital moment. I mean, I couldn't connect that time. But I cannot understand, if I may just get back to the previous, when all of us were talking about MNREGA. What's wrong with MNREGA? It is a rural employment guarantee scheme. Why do we look down on it? Why is it ridiculous if there is less allocation for it? It is ridiculous because even MNREGA adds to the assets of the countries. I mean, when it was COVID, you could pump in 1.1 lakh crore into it. And now you allocate 60,000 crores. You are looking down upon it. What's wrong? No, what's wrong if rural
that is exactly what should happen.
It's a guarantee scheme.
Yes.
Why do you look down upon it? Do you not like the rural people being associated
or you don't
with these
understand
jobs?
safety nets? You don't understand demand-driven safety nets?
What is the safety net? What is unsafe about the rural guarantee?
There's nothing wrong about it. When the economy picks up, you should expect the safety net not to be required to the same extent. Surely that is logical.
It's my choice whether I wish to be associated with the MNREGA scheme or not.
Yes, and people are not. It's not your choice. The people are walking out of it because they're getting jobs.
It's my choice as the individual of the country. There is no tangible job creation.
Okay, let me bring in. Let's open this up further.
Since I lost out. Now tell me that data of labor force participation. I mean, we are all discussing about it.
Yeah.
And CMI data says that the male labor force participation was 67.4%. You missed out on the female. You missed out on the female labor force. You don't want them to be in the labor force either. 9.4%. Are we not going to talk about that? Are we not are we going to evade the World Bank data? Why is the female labor force participation so low? Why should we speak about it? And there was the discussion, it is so very nice. Confused. Just tell me that India's public, no, it's not confusion. You have to see it very straight because we deal with people. We are representatives of the people we are elected by.
Let him finish.
We actually, no. It's not serious. I'm not being rhetoric. This is genuinely. You see, what was the harm for the government of India to allocate the on-time budgets to West Bengal? If I want to quote an example, there was no allocation of budget. There were workers left out of the wages. Why was this done?
I'm sorry.
No. What is? We were talking about MNREGA. It was all fine when you spoke about it. Why are you cutting it down? What is wrong in allocation?
Okay, let's get some responses. You posed a question. You've just heard Mr. Sanya. Let me get in Dr. KV Subramaniam as well as Arvind Panagria on this. First of all, is there some condescension with regards to MNREGA? That's what she's asking. Why are you so disparaging? Why do sort of not give it its importance. Is that what's happening? I didn't get that.
No, I agree with what Sanjeev has said, and I'll add to, I think it's very clear that the MNREGA is work that is demanded, and it's demanded, far more during distress. I think that's absolutely clear. If, I mentioned this again, in the 2018-19 economic survey, we wrote a chapter on this showing this very clearly. As for the, labor force participation, I would refer, my esteemed panelists to what has been written in this year's economic survey about how, female LFPR is actually being underestimated. I just have to make one more point, because all through the day, Sanjay has been, and Dr. Mehrotra have been talking about actually crowding in not happening. Let me, again quote from chapter 9 of the economic survey this year. If you look at the actual data, from April to December of this year, the new investments in manufacturing that have been announced, those are thrice as much, in FY20 during the same period. If this is not crowding in, what is crowding in? So, let's talk based on evidence rather than trying to actually selectively pick numbers and really portray a narrative that is, departed from reality. I think to summarize, I will just say that the evidence of public CapEx creating employment is clearly there, of it crowding in is also there, and a lot of the rhetoric that is being talked about and employment comes from unreliable, noisy CMI data, which we basically should not be using at all. And PLFS, and I think Sanjeev said it right, if you look at the quarterly PLFS data, clearly the numbers are far better, and that is why critics are choosing not to pick those data.
Yeah,
I think the jury actually.
If I may come in once.
Yeah, one second.
Now I can quote the PLFS data.
Yeah, 1 second. Let's go one by one. I'd given time to Dr. Panagria. After that, Dr. Panja can come through, and then you can raise your points, Mr. Jha and Dr. Mehrotra, and I'll get Sanjeev Sanyal and the BJP MP also to respond to you. Yes, Dr. Panagria.
Right. So on NREGA, I think we have talked enough about it, but I'll just repeat, it is demand driven, and if more demand comes through, more resources will be provided as has been done. As for labor force participation rates, whatever numbers you want to believe, the fact really is that, look, those numbers are coming from the era in which, in fact, the NREGA spend was 1.1 lakh crore rupees, or, something very large. So it's not that NREGA will actually solve the labor participation, female labor participation rate problem. That is a structural, deeper problem. It goes all the way back to 2004-05, from whence it began. So I don't think we have full handle on it. I don't think we fully understand what actually has caused it. So that's where there is. Now, on this private capital expenditure, I do not understand why there is so much misinformation. If you look at the data, in the last 2 years, the investment to GDP ratio has risen from below 30% to 34%. Now, this is not the government CapEx, because government CapEx is only, even in this last year, after the increase that happened, was 2.9% of the GDP. So out of the 34%, the government one is only 2.9%. So private capital expenditure is actually doing very well. It has risen by 3 to 4 percentage points in the last 2 years. So let us recognize the facts at least. This is very clearly laid out in a diagram, etc., everything in the economic survey, and also the summary of the economic survey. So I want to put that down. It is not only that deleveraging has happened, but private investment has in fact picked up. And this is why I personally feel very buoyant that the situation on private investment to me now looks like where we were in 2003 once, when the CapEx cycle, private CapEx cycle, had begun to take off. Okay. And it is going to go on.
Okay, Sanjay Jha, you need a safety net. When do you need a safety net? You need it when you're in the doldrums. You obviously don't need a safety net if you're coming out of a situation. And that's why you're seeing perhaps lower demand for it, and therefore a realistic relook at the figures. That's all that's happening. And it's a good thing. If people are going back to work in urban areas, there is less need to dig ditches or do other unproductive work in rural areas, then I think that should be welcomed.
Rahul, two short points. There seems to be this big assumption that because India's GDP went up after a staggering fall of minus 6.7%, that Indians are suddenly better off. Let me now quote, because Mr. Sanyal was
changing the
actually talking
goalpost.
about. No, I'm not. I'm giving you two examples that will actually corroborate my point. I'm quoting once again the NSO and the PLFS. It is clear if you aggregate the data for rural and urban poor that 83%, that's majority of India and plus, are actually worse off in real income over the last 5 years. It's a sustained pauperization of India's poor. Point number two, all this talk about infrastructure sounds very sexy. I agree, but here's the catch. You have today one of the biggest infrastructure players, and this is the elephant in the room that we need to address, on a serious corporate governance issue today, is seeing a wipeout of $92 billion of market valuation in case of 4 trading days alone. It tells you how collapsed the whole administration of governance under Mr. Modi's government is, because you can't really do it when you have a famous foreign bank which has actually said that we won't even accept the bond of this company as a collateral. So, there is a systemic fault line. There is a strategic, structural, I would say, question mark over the way this government operates. And I think that will put a big dark spot on the India growth story.
Okay, Gautam Chikarmane, respond to this. At one time, when the FM was making the announcements on the middle class, etc., and obviously when she announced this record CapEx spend, the stock markets were going up. Then we suddenly saw them flatlining, and there was a problem. So even the Sensex hasn't really cheered the budget, so to speak. Why is that? Is it because of the Adani factor? What is it?
I think the fall in Adani shares, they comprise a fairly high weightage in the Sensex, so that must be out. But do we really need to give so much attention to markets which fluctuate on a day-to-day? What happens tomorrow, suppose the Adani enterprise problem goes away and everything is clean, there is no corporate misgovernance, etc. Just theoretically. In that case, when the Sensex goes up, is it an ovation for the budget or is it an ovation for the stock? I think let's stick to the fundamental issue here, which is in terms of real money going in infrastructure. Infrastructure multiplier is 2.5 to 3 on GDP. You invest 1 rupee in infrastructure, you get 2.5 to 3 rupees on GDP over a certain time span. I think that's a no-brainer. The infrastructure story as a growth propeller is a no-brainer. I'm hearing a lot of things about private investment. The numbers show that their private investment is coming in. I would just like to add one more number to it, which is that the FDI by the end of this year, which is this fiscal year, 22-23, is likely to cross $100 billion. It was, I think, 60 or 70 in the previous year. That is also private investment coming in, and I believe more of this private investment will continue to come in. I think the infrastructure is the story in this budget, the infrastructure spending. I mean, just to give you a context, if you include the asset creation, it's not 10 lakh crore, it's about 13.7 lakh crore. Let me illustrate this number. This is about almost half the GDP of Pakistan. That is the amount of money we are putting into infrastructure. You think this is not going to create jobs? You think this is not going to create companies? You think private companies are not going to ride this infrastructure story? All this is being done at a fiscal deficit which has come down 5.9%, and I can see a glide path as going forward. I think over the next few budgets, this capital spend will come down, fiscal deficit will come down, private investment will come in, and I think this is a no-brainer. I mean,
okay.
I don't understand this whole argument about private investment not coming in, jobs not happening.
Okay, MB Rajesh, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer, and I'll get Sanjeev Sanyal and Mr. Sinha.
One small point.
Yeah, small point. Okay, go ahead. Make your point, sir.
Can I just make one small point on the MNREGA discussion, which is that MNREGA is a law, bhai. It's a law. tomorrow, if any person says that I want a NREGA entitlement, I need to work, I need my 100 days of wages, there is no government that can deny him. So suppose there is X amount of money allocated in this budget. The moment there is somebody who wants it, or a group of people who need it, or suddenly there is a new crisis that comes and millions of people want it, there is no way that
that obligation can be ignored.
Evade this responsibility.
Okay, let me bring in MB Rajesh.
Yeah,
that's an important point. MB Rajesh, all this is being done by taming the fiscal deficit. You're going to have expenditure that is going to inevitably create jobs. It's going to, as people are saying here, crowd in private capital. Why wouldn't it happen? It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, before that, let me clarify about MNREGA. The supporters of government, they are claiming, on the one hand, they are claiming is that it's a demand-driven scheme and we need not worry about drastic reduction in MNREGA allocation. On the one hand, some other experts who are supporting this budget, they are saying that the decline in MNREGA budget is a good sign. So this is the reality. So if it is a demand-driven scheme, why the union government is not approving labor budgets demanded by state governments? I shared my experience in Kerala.
Okay.
We demanded a labor budget.
A quick response from Mr. Jayant Sinha on that point.
But the
you're not acting in the spirit of cooperative federalism, says MB Rajesh.
Not at all.
Dr. Panja also makes the same charge.
Secondly, no, please let me complete just one more point. This budget is a brutal surgical strike on the poor of our country. Apart from MNREGA, the allocation for PM Kisan Fund has been reduced. Apart from MNREGA, food subsidy has been reduced, fertilizer subsidy has been reduced. The allocation for SC is a mere 3.5% against a population of 16%. Allocation for ST is a mere 2.5% against a population of 8%. And so that is why I am saying that this
surgical strike. Okay,
surgical strike
Mr. Sinha,
on the poor of our country.
Two responses you need to give. Government's not giving money to states for MNREGA or under MNREGA, and then this is a surgical strike on the most vulnerable. Mr. Sinha, can you hear us? Your response, sir.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you earlier, Rahul.
Yeah.
So I will assure Shri Rajesh that whatever is owed to him, these are arrears from the central government to the state government. They will certainly be paid. Maybe there is a timing issue here, but they will certainly be paid as they have been paid.
That's the point, Rahul.
I was speaking, madam. I was speaking. Please don't interrupt. You will get a chance to state your point. Please do not interrupt. I think it's extremely rude to interrupt when I'm speaking. I don't interrupt when you speak. So what I was saying was that if indeed these are payments that are due to the state governments, they will come in due course. That is something that has to be negotiated and sorted out by the central government. These are tactical issues. I think the much more important issue that we need to discuss is to recognize that the economic strategy that the government has been pursuing over the last 3 or 4 years has worked brilliantly well to position India through a once-in-a-century pandemic, through a Ukraine war, through a commodity price shock. Through all of this, we've come out with flying colors. Okay. Our growth is strong at 7%. Our growth will continue to be strong even as the global economy slows down. And much more importantly, please recognize that we have been able to increase investment, we have been able to support consumption, while at the same time we have brought down the fiscal deficit.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Sanyal on this point. Look, both the opposition parties tonight, TMC and the left, are saying you're not supporting MNREGA. This is an attempt at trying to actually water and whittle it out. Number one. Number two, they're also saying that, look, at the end of the day, you're cutting a large number of subsidies. So this is a surgical strike. A quick response from you on that.
Well, I think this point has been belabored, but I'll make it yet again. MNREGA is a demand-driven, it is a right, and consequently, if more people turn up, the
this is about giving money from the center to the states.
Yeah, so the government will have to give it, whether they like it or not.
So why aren't you giving it?
Yeah, wait. So this is an issue here is, if more people demand it, more allocation will automatically happen. That is not an issue. Whether or not the transfers have been made by the center to the states, Yes, that's a fair thing. If there are certain such demands, then they should be made and they should be paid. I will not say that if there is a legitimate demand that is of monies to be received by states, the centre should certainly be making those transfers. I don't think there is nobody is demanding anything like that. I don't know the specifics of this, of some states' arrears.
But they say that it's callousness towards the poor that
the
makes
main
you sit
point,
on
the
this.
main point they are making is that it's callousness to reduce the budget. And that is utterly ridiculous because obviously it's demand driven.
And the second point, the subsidies that are being whittled down.
That is not at all the case. There are large numbers of subsidies that are made, and I think this is utterly ridiculous that you take the percentage of a certain population and say that the budget should be as percentage of that population. Surely most of the budget is spent on general public goods that everybody uses. So if you have some specific amounts of money for a certain population, that's great, but do realize that even that specified population does utilize defense, highways, and many other things that central government spends. If it is the case that a particular population does require special support, incidentally, most of the support will come from the state budgets because that's where most of the things like education, health, etc. are based.
Well, very quickly, viewers, the decision has been taken by the Prime Minister to eschew populism. Now, you can like it or you can accept it. That's fundamental. And that's why I'm saying, is this a new paradigm? Is it a new benchmark? Is it a game changer? That's what we will have to see, viewers. I'll leave it at this.